The Leader podcast brings you news, analysis and commentary from the Evening Standard every weekday at 4 p.m. Subscribe to make sure you never miss out, and tell your friends about us too. Use the hashtag The Leader podcast on social media. Now, from the Evening Standard in London, this is The Leader.
Evening Standard, it's your Evening Standard.
Hi, I'm David Marsland. The US and Australia are airlifting citizens off a cruise ship with coronavirus on board. Will the UK do the same?
It's clear that the virus is spreading. Certainly if you're on board that ship, I'm sure you'd be very concerned.
Our deputy political editor Nicholas Cecil on the growing pressure British passengers are putting on the government. Also, Storm Dennis is on the retreat, but it's not quite over yet. And
all kinds of strange things. A Superman outfit made for Christopher Reeve, a Frankenstein costume made for the Bride of Frankenstein in 1936, which is rather random.
Arts correspondent Robert Dex on the multi-million-pound refurbishment of the V&A's Museum of Childhood. Taken from the Evening Standard's editorial column, this is The Leader. For the whole thing, pick up the newspaper or head to standard.co.uk/comment. In a moment, the US and Australia are taking people off the Diamond Princess. Why are the Brits still on board? British diplomats are scrambling to get nearly 80 UK citizens off a coronavirus-stricken cruise ship in a Japanese port. They say they're urgently considering all options, including a chartered repatriation flight. But with 99 more cases identified on the ship, more than 450 overall, Brits on board fear they've been forgotten about. Meanwhile, the US and Australia have already begun airlifting passengers off. The Evening Standard's editorial column says the British frustration is understandable and warns it's time for the government to act, as leaving them there looks increasingly likely to result in their infection. Well, our deputy political editor Nicholas Cecil joins me from the Westminster office. Nicholas, what's stopping the UK government from doing what the US and Australia have already started?
Well, I don't think anything is actually stopping the UK government from carrying out a repatriation flight. What health experts are telling me is that in terms of actually containing the virus, that the best solution would be for people on board the ship to be taken on shore and to be quarantined locally in Japan. And Japan has a very advanced healthcare system, so it might be possible to do that. British diplomats have been exploring that with the Japanese authorities. But I think there is now growing pressure on the government, the British government, to follow the example of America and Australia, Canada and Israel, and to bring their nationals home. In some ways, that might be easier because we now have got facilities set up in the UK, for example, at Arrow Park Hospital on Merseyside, to bring British nationals home and quarantine them for 14 days to try and contain the spread of this virus.
And Sir Richard Branson's offered to give his help, and that's after an appeal for him to help people like David Abel, who's one of the British passengers on board, who's been uploading those videos of life stuck on the ship.
Yes, that was someone who actually was, I think, appealing on behalf of passengers such as David Abel. And Richard Branson has said that he's in contact with the government. I'm not sure how much will come of that. Certainly the previous repatriation flights were chartered planes. I think one came from Spain. But certainly the focus, as of this morning in Whitehall, was on trying to get a repatriation flight sorted out. As of lunchtime today, that hadn't been guaranteed, but that's what British diplomats in Tokyo are working on.
It must be, for those passengers on board, whether they're British or not, really scary to be there, because the numbers of people being infected on that ship keep going up every day.
Yes, this morning we had confirmation of 99 more cases on board this ship. So it's clear that the virus is spreading. It is clearly quite infectious. The mortality rate is believed to be less than 2%, but certainly if you're on board that ship, I'm sure you'd be very concerned.
Next, the damage and disruption caused by Storm Dennis. They've been clearing up in South Wales after Storm Dennis brought wind and rain across the weekend. In London, hundreds of commuter train services were cancelled or delayed as rail workers battled to repair the damage to lines. More than 600 flood alerts remain in place across Britain. Jonathan Prynn's been assessing the damage. And Jonathan, this is 2 storms in as many weeks, but London got off somewhat lightly with this one.
It did. It was windy. We had gales. It rained like crazy for most of Sunday, which is normally not good news for the Monday start to the working week for London. But there was plenty of warning for this storm. The Met Office were talking about it about 5 or 6 days out, and the worst of it does seem to have hit the elsewhere in the country. And there were some services that weren't running this morning, some flooded tracks around the commuter network, and a couple of landslides. But certainly, I think London overall dodged a bullet on Dennis.
Who got it worst?
Well, as ever, dear old West Country, South Wales, flooding was sort of Gloucestershire, those parts of the country that always seem to be in the line of fire when these storms barrel in from the Atlantic, and the first land they hit is those areas to the west of the British Isles, and they bear the brunt of it. By the time it had reached London, the wind speeds are slightly lower, and there's not quite so much rain.
Is this over now? Are we done with the storms for now?
It's, crystal ball time. It's one of those phenomenon. We just don't know how many of these storms we're going to get. We're only on Dennis, which is 4 in, given that they named them alphabetically. And I think in the peak year, I think we went to about 13 or 14 named storms. So the potential is there for several more, I would have thought, before the winter is out. They tend to peter out when the spring warmer weather comes, but it's certainly not time to unbatten the hatches, or what the opposite is of battening down the hatches.
And you can get weather updates online at standard.co.uk, and also keep up to date with our audio bulletins available through smart speakers. Just ask for the news from the Evening Standard. Now, the V&A's Museum of Childhood is one of London's favourite attractions, and it's about to get a £13 million refit. It does mean it'll be shut for 2 years, but the reward at the end will be 2,000 objects going on show, from a huge warhorse puppet to original illustrations by Beatrix Potter. Our arts correspondent Robert Dex has been given a sneak preview of the plans, and Robert, they look really impressive.
Yeah, we wouldn't normally celebrate a museum closing, but in this case, it's sort of good news. It closes later this year for 2 years and gets a £13 million rejig, essentially. If you go in 2 years' time, I don't think the building will look that different from outside. Inside, it will have been tidied up, smartened up. They're adding a stage to it. But actually, what's really going to change is what they're bringing in. It all started because of a place nobody really knows about and goes to, called Blythe House down the road in Olympia, which is where lots of London museums, including the V&A, keep all the things they don't have room to show. The government decided they wanted to sell off Blythe House, and lots of museums were suddenly faced with, oh heck, we've got all this stuff, what are we going to do with it? And one of the things the V&A is doing, many things. It's opened an outpost in Scotland, and it's going to East London, Stratford as well. But it's sort of opening out the space it has in Whitechapel at the Museum of Childhood, and bringing in lots of things that aren't very often on display. So it will seem, I imagine, when you walk through the door, like a brand new museum.
What sort of really special things have they had hidden away there?
All kinds of strange things. A Superman outfit made for Christopher Reeve for Superman 4, a Frankenstein costume made for the Bride of Frankenstein in 1936, which is rather random. There's going to be a huge collection of dolls' houses, Star Wars models. Of course, it is their Museum of Childhood. There's kind of no limit on what they can put in it. and it looks like they're really going to take it and run with that.
Yeah, I've certainly enjoyed taking my own son around the Museum of Childhood, mostly to point at the toys that I used to have and tell him how much better my toys were than his. But I guess maybe it does need a bit of a refresher. It must have been some time since it's kind of been changed up a bit.
It opened in the 19th century. I mean, obviously it has changed since then, but it has sort of, as you go in, there's a big central hall and then sort of 2 or 3 floors either side of displays, and it was quite sort of tired and a bit old-fashioned looking. And I guess I'm sure they'd rather not close, but to close for 2 years to sort of bring it up to speed and up to date, it will probably be a worthwhile investment.
And that's The Leader. You can subscribe through your podcast provider and get in touch with us through the hashtag The Leader Podcast. We're back tomorrow at 4.